It's my pleasure to, introduce and start this session of our Rising Stars Fireside Chat series, which occurs after our OICR Labs Horizons and Controversies in Oncology Symposium series that just happened about 20 minutes ago or so. So it's before I continue on and introduce everybody, as is customary here in Canada, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement again, because this is another new event here. And again, we are acknowledging the land that we're meeting on. Again, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe and Chippewa and Haudenosaunee peoples and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and others. And we acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And again, this is a virtual meeting, so you might be on other treaty lands and other territories that were previously inhabited and still inhabited by our Indigenous peoples. And so take time to reflect on this and really honor their heritage and their history. So it's really a great honor and really excitement to be continuing, this series of fireside chats for our trainees across Ontario. We first thought of this program about three years ago, and I met a couple of graduate students and postdocs, namely Kimberly Skeed and David Bakshinian, and from McMaster, and Kimberly from OICR, and they got really excited about it. And I have to say that they and their colleagues have brought together a fantastic network of trainees at the postdoctoral graduate student level as well. And it's really taken off. And, we now have a whole bunch of different events, including this one. We have workshops, seminars of our trainees. We have a yearly award competition that just happened. And again, congratulations to the Rising Star awardees. We offer travel awards for trainees to conferences, which I hope will happen again for travel. And also we provide opportunities for the trainees to meet internationally recognized scientists, both in the academic field, but also in the industry, to understand different career options and where to go. And I think this is really the power of this, to really gain a diversity of opinions and listen and learn and get insights from really successful people that have sort of, went through the trials and tribulations of generating a career and made some of the mistakes, and now are really here to give them our wisdom. And it's really great that we have some of these here today. So we have with us today Dr. Catherine Bollard from the National Children's Hospital. She's, again, I don't want to go through all the accolades, but she's right now at George Washington University. She's the Bosworth Chair of Cancer Biology, and she's the Director of the Center of Immunology Research and Professor of Pediatrics and Microbiology, Immunology, and Tropical Medicine at the Children's National Health System there, associated with George Washington University. And she's been in the cell therapy field for many years and has done landmark trials and really has a huge clinical impact. And her work has probably saved the lives of many patients and children. And I'd also like to introduce another participant, Dr. Jonathan Bramson. I've known Jonathan for a number of years. He's a great scientist, great immunologist. He's the Vice Dean of Research at the Faculty of Health Sciences and Professor at the Department of Medicine at McMaster University. He's a world-renowned expert, again, in cell therapy. He's launched a very successful biotech company called Triumvir, which is now in clinical trials. So it'd be great to hear from him. And we also have Dr. Parvez Vora from Century Therapeutics, who's a site head for the company, I guess, here in Canada, which is a company that recently merged with a company that Sheila Singh started at McMaster University, targeting CAR T cells to glioblastoma, I think targeting CD133. So, and they're developing some really exciting new iPSC-derived allogeneic immune cell therapies targeting CD133 and other targets. And so, hearing about his journey and, the career opportunities in biotech is a great opportunity for us. So I'd like to start by handing it over to first Kath. We call her name is Catherine, but we all call her Kath. So I'm going to give it over to Kath Bollard to provide maybe about 8 or 10 minutes on some of her perspectives on her professional journey, including some of the key challenges, obstacles, and decisions you faced, and whatever initial advice you can provide for early career researchers and recent graduates based on your career journey and some of the decisions you made. So, Catherine, welcome, and we really look forward to hearing your comments.
So I do have some slides. Is that okay, Laszlo? Because I give this talk quite a lot.
I think Kelly, I think, has to give you screen sharing. She's the one with the power. So
go ahead. Yeah.
So this, I'm often, as a female physician scientist and someone that leads a big research group and has co-founded a couple of companies, I do get asked this sort of so-called work-life balance talk. So this is not one of those things because I don't have work-life balance, but this is my career journey. And I do have some disclosures both in this, all in the cell therapy space. So I guess because the audience is looking at going to their first sort of faculty role. This is my career journey. As you can tell, I'm not from America, I'm from New Zealand, and I graduated in the early 90s. At that time, I actually wanted to be an opera singer. I didn't actually want to be a doctor, but I went to England to train in opera singing, but I had to pay my way. My soon-to-be husband's also a musician, and so decided actually that I needed to do some proper work, quote unquote. So started working at St. Bartholomew's Hospital doing pediatric oncology and hematology, and just really, really loved it, and decided, really made a choice then that my passion was in pediatric and adult hematology. And I was even at that stage pretty keen on doing bone marrow transplant. So I, having made that big decision not to do singing, I think is one of the pivotal things that happened to me. Then got married, did all my boards, and to be double board certified in pathology, hematology, as well as pediatrics and internal medicine. And really moved to Houston, Texas, because in 2000, I decided that it was important, I believed at the time, to kill cancer cells and not kill healthy cells. And I really believed that the immunotherapy or cell therapy was the way to do that. And in Houston, that the group from St. Jude's, Helen Heslop, Malcolm Brenner, and Cleo Rooney had just moved there, and so it was really serendipitous that I got that job position there, and after a couple of years went on faculty. Many women in this space go, well, when do you fit in the children? It's true, that was, unexpected surprise, but my husband and I had 2 children along my career journey. And did a second degree, and all the time my lab is growing, as well as my family, as you can see here. I then became an associate professor. The lab gets bigger, and then I became a full professor with tenure in 2012, and when I was in my mid-40s. My lab over that time sort of grows, so you sort of have more and more responsibilities, and you take on, more and more. And it was a time when I was really very happy in my position at Baylor, and people say you should always move when you're happy. And it was actually my husband who said, you know, we have to get out of Texas. I don't want to bring up our children here. So I looked at many different places who were looking to recruit, and I really chose Children's National mainly for the location and the back door of Hopkins and NIH and obviously GW and Georgetown, all of which I collaborate with closely. So I was recruited to build a cell therapy program from scratch, and over that time we've built to starting with just a handful of people to now a program that's well over 70 to 80 people. So being a female physician scientist in particular, I think, and especially if you're responsible for INDs, investigational new drugs with the FDA, there's a lot of pressure put on you, and you never have, you can't ignore your home life. And I feel as time goes on, there's less and less white space on this slide. So as I go up the ranks, it gets more and more, and obviously your home life doesn't go away. So how, what keeps me doing what I'm doing? And I think, the bottom line is I love being part of a team. What we do really is team science, and, to take novel cell therapies from bench to bedside is really something I'm very passionate about. So if you're interested in that, what should you look for when you interview? And there's three big things that I would look for. So infrastructure, not only in terms of physical, but personnel and administrative and regulatory. Money. That's, whether you're in academia or in industry, is there money to support you and the research program as a whole? And then mentorship. And it doesn't matter if you're in academia or wherever, mentorship for doing the type of work we do is so key and needs multiple mentors. Your mentor must have commitment to you. It must be a mutual commitment, and this understanding that it's a prolonged process. Just because you're going to be at a big premier institution does not necessarily mean you're going to get so-called great mentorship. But on the other side, going to a small institute, you might not have the same critical net mass that you need. But mentorship is so important. Mentors come in all flavors. You could certainly have mentors from different institutions and different areas of science, etc. But the bottom line is, we all have to come together to work as a team. And what I look for in my team is this sort of ability to trust the team, to have a shared vision, and to make sure that you communicate effectively. So people say, well, what do you look for when you are recruiting people? And that's sort of really what I look for, that you have to have a shared vision, that you're trustworthy, effective communicator, demonstrates ability to be a collaborator and a team player, and having this, being able to show that you're truly passionate and about what you want to do. And obviously the traditional model is just looking at people's CV, but that's obviously showing that you've got a track record. But for me, above all, is this ability to show that you're truly passionate and you just love what you do and you want to be there and part of the team. So that's my little 2 minute.
No, that's fantastic. Wow.
Tour of my life.
Maybe, I don't know, I'm tempted to ask you to sing for us, but no, I won't do that, Kath. Sorry. That's amazing. I didn't know that part of your history or part of your life, that you actually were a singer and an opera singer. That's amazing.
Clearly we haven't drunk enough together.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, definitely. Okay. So Next, I'd like to call upon Jonathan Bramson to give us a few comments about his career journey and some of the do's and don'ts and what he experienced. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, sure. I don't have any don'ts. I have a lot of do's. Um, so yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. Always happy to share the story, and I apologize to those of you who may have heard the story before. So you know, the best thing I can recommend to you is please don't be prescriptive about your choices in life or how your life has to go. If you had asked me 30 or so years ago, 20 or so years ago, if I'd ever be a full professor at university, my answer would have been hell no. And if you'd ever asked me if I'd be vice dean of research, my answer would have been surely you're out of your mind. So, you know, stuff happens, and if you are open to opportunity, then you're able to follow it. And you know, so I throw up here this line from a John Lennon song because I kind of feel it fits the purpose. But I thought to myself, well, I'll be clever myself and follow that line up with one from me, that life is one experiment after another. But I thought I should probably just check and make sure no one else had that clever idea. And it turns out that Lou Ludwig, who is, you know, a life coach of no particular renown, published this online long before I thought of putting it onto my presentation. So I have to acknowledge him. But I really do think that it's important that we approach our lives the same way we approach our science, which is we have hypotheses, but we're not married to them, and we do the right experiments, and if necessary, we drop the hypothesis and pick up another one. And I certainly hope that you'll consider the same approach as you move forward. In terms of my career as a scientist, it really began in the late 80s in Montreal, where I grew up. I did my biochemistry degree at McGill. And the reason I did it is probably not the same reason most people do it. So at the time, I was very into weightlifting and exercise, and folks around me were just popping dietary supplements like it was crazy. And I didn't really think they were doing very much. But it did seem to me to be a pretty lucrative career, selling supplements. And so I thought to myself, well, if I want to sell these things, I probably need the credibility of a professional degree of some sort. And biochemistry seemed appropriate. So I decided to go up to biochemistry with the sole intent of becoming a salesperson and ultimately making a company that would sell what I would argue are useless dietary supplements to people who think that they're helping them. But of course, you know, as I progressed through the degree, I was certainly open to other options. And I would say that really where my life began to change was in a nucleic acids course taught by Nathan Sonnenberg at McGill, where I was looking for a third-year project because in undergraduate degrees in Montreal is only 3 years. And Nachum had asked me if I wanted to work in his lab, and I'm not sure why he did that, to be quite frank, but he did. And I worked in his lab, and that was a shared project with Philippe Gros, and it was some really cool molecular genetics in mice. That was fraught with disastrous outcomes, but the experience was really positive. And people were encouraging. And so I had never thought of doing a graduate degree. It never crossed my mind. But based on the encouragement of those folks, I then decided, well, you know what, I'll give it a shot. And so I entered a program at McGill called Experimental Medicine, which is a pretty neat program at the time because the program only gave PhDs. So there was no MSc option in the program. So if you came in, you committed to doing a PhD, and you only got an MSc as a consolation prize if you couldn't pass your comprehensives. So, you know, I worked hard, as one does, and generated lots of data and lots of papers, and I was convinced at the end of that degree that I would never be successful as an independent scientist. I was so convinced. And so at that point in time, I decided the only chance I have of ever having any kind of career would be to go to the private sector. And the rationale was I was very good in the lab. I could make things happen. But I didn't think I was particularly creative or intelligent or capable of running my own show. So I figured, well, I could be a hired gun. You know, if someone wants things done, I could figure out how to get it done. And it seemed to me at the time, because, you know, I knew what I knew, that industry would be the place to do that. So I actually applied to a couple of companies for industrial postdocs, and All the companies were in the States, and I didn't really want to leave Canada. I had just gotten married. So I consulted with some other colleagues, and it gets back to Kath's point about mentorship. It's really important that you have folks you can trust to vet your ideas against. And so I had a number of faculty members within my community that I trusted quite a bit, and I asked them what they thought about futures, and they were really strongly supportive of gene therapy. This was at the early 90s. Gene therapy was just manifesting as a viable option for clinical use. And so I thought, okay, well, are there any good places in Canada? And there were. I ended up here in Hamilton in the lab of Frank Graham, who's one of the godfathers of the adenovirus vector biology. The adenovirus, for those of you who aren't familiar, ultimately emerged as being the vaccine that AstraZeneca brought forward. It wasn't the big winner, I suppose. I think the mRNA vaccines were the big winners, but still, we've got tens of millions of people vaccinated with it, so it can't be all that bad. So I learned a lot. I got to work with Frank Graham, and again, a partnership where Jack Goldie was my other supervisor. So again, outstanding mentors, one outstanding Canadian virologist, the other outstanding Canadian immunologist, both very well entrenched in the community, taught me a lot. Productive again, lots of fun, had great time with my colleagues. Still was not convinced I had anything to offer, that I had no novel ideas, there was nothing I thought of that no one else had thought of. And again, the only chance I had was to go to the private sector, and I was in luck because in the late 90s, there was tons of cash coming into gene therapy companies because the economy was booming. So I looked around, looked at some companies in the US, still being a staunch Canadian, wanted to stay in Canada, found one in Burnaby, BC called Inex, and I worked there for 2 years, and it was a really valuable experience. Inex had just IPO'd, they had hired on a ton of young people. I got to really understand what industry was like, and I got to realize that it was certainly not for me, that this was not the place I belonged, even though, in 94, 5 years earlier, at the end of my PhD, I was convinced that was the only route I could possibly take. Having had that experience, it wasn't for me. It's for a lot of people, and there's some outstanding science being done in industry. It just wasn't the right thing for me, and I'm happy to discuss why it wasn't for me afterwards. So not being happy at Inex and looking for options in Canada, the folks at McMaster actually recruited me back. They liked all of the non-viral work that I was doing at Inex. Incidentally, I rapidly dropped the non-viral stuff in about 3 years and became a virologist all over again and a gene therapist. And I've been at Mac ever since, and I've made some great collaborations and had fantastic opportunities to work with bright young scientists and young faculty members, and over time realized I enjoy helping research. I enjoy creating environments that allow others to succeed, and that is not something I realized when I was young. It was something that I only realized over about 20 odd years of experience because I was open to it. And it's not altruistic. I do these things because it benefits my research as well. So I want to live in an environment that supports the work that I do, but the best kind of scenario is where I can create environments where others can succeed, and that enables my success. So that's been my approach through things, and here I am today. So certainly happy to talk further about any of these experiences afterwards, but I think I'll end it over here.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, it's amazing how we have these circuitous journeys in our lives, and what I've learned too, and I think you're teaching us that lesson, is we have to we have to embrace change and not be afraid of it, and follow your heart, so to speak. So I'd like to call upon Parvez Vora from Century Therapeutics. And Parvez, yeah, I'd like to really hear, I'm excited to listen to your career journey.
Thank you, Laszlo. I do also have a few slides that I would love to share. It's more about my journey to where I'm right now. People see my slides right now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, OICR, Dr. Advani, Kelly, for inviting me. My name is Parvez Vora. I work for US-based Century Therapeutics. The company has a research lab here in Hamilton, Ontario, where we are developing next generation off-the-shelf iPSC-derived cell therapy for cancer. For today's presentation, I have prepared some slides to share my journey from where I started and where I'm now. And so as a background, I'll start with my education and experiences, followed by how I ended up jumping from academia to industry. And I believe that is something many of you like to hear as well. And lastly, a little bit about my current position of how what is happening in the company itself. So I did my undergrad degree in India, and it was in biology. Got exposed to a wide range of subjects from environmental sciences to molecular biology to zoology. And one particular subject that really fascinated me then was neuroscience. As my studies in India were all taught courses, I moved to the UK to do a more research-oriented master's degree. I completed my master's from University of London with major project in neuroscience looking at glial cell-derived neurotrophic factor, or GDNF. Following that, I pursued my PhD at University of Manitoba in the cellular neuroscience group, where I was involved looking at myelin-related genes in different neurodevelopmental disorders. My PhD research was really aimed at looking at glial cells, which make up the white matter in the brain. And the project itself was very intriguing, very fascinating. I published a few good papers, super happy about it. However, although I loved neuroscience as a subject, I realized that if I want to see my bench work go to the clinic, academia may not be the way to go. Also, neurodevelopmental diseases are too complicated to be cured, and we still require decades of research before we have a good therapy that can help the patients. So it is then I was thinking maybe I need to kind of look for industry positions and move somewhere out of Canada, because I was in Manitoba. There were absolutely no biotech companies who would hire somebody with my skill sets. So taking my experience working with glial cells, I started to look for labs across Canada who are doing research which is more translatable. And from glial cells, and it was very naive at that point. I'm like, okay, glioblastoma. So glioblastoma is a brain tumor which are thought to arise from this glial cells which have gone crazy and now growing uncontrollably. So I looked up who is an top researcher in Canada with glioblastoma, and Dr. Sheila Singh's name popped up in the PubMed. I'm like, okay, this is perfect. Let me see if she can hire me. So I moved to McMaster as a postdoc, and I also did a mini MBA here. For people who don't know, this is a very short course that is run by the GSA. Here at McMaster, I believe UFT as well does that. It gives you a taste of what business world revolves around and what are the key management skill sets that we as scientists or researchers are lacking. I think that was something which I learned as part of my education, which was eye-opening. So anyways, my post-PhD time was split between Hamilton and Toronto. As a postdoc, I joined Dr. Sheila Singh's lab at Stem Cell Cancer Research Institute here at McMaster. Sheila is a surgeon, scientist. She's a world-leading expert in brain tumors. She is a great mentor, and she gave me an excellent opportunity to develop my scientific and leadership skills. My early work was really focused on conducting preclinical validation studies with several small molecules inhibitors using patient-derived brain tumor samples. Within a few years, my title was upgraded to program scientist, and as I started spending more time helping Sheila manage multi-institutional collaborative grants. And I know the postdocs in the audience are probably chuckling because it's just a project scientist in an academic lab is equivalent to a glorified postdoc with more responsibilities. However, I think this position did prepare me, and I was now involved in something that had much of a broader vision of developing, designing, and implementing preclinical studies, testing various therapeutic modalities, which are now expanded to not just small molecules, but antibodies and cell therapy products. I worked with cross-functional academic groups, got involved with sponsored research agreements with biotech companies, and this was more sort of an opportunity I got, and the key thing there was being there at the right time, at the right place. I think that I feel is very important when you're in your career development. In parallel, I also got involved with this small biotech company called Arch Biopartners from Toronto. There I managed one of the company's portfolio for brain tumors. My role was really to liaise between this academic industry partnership, and I would help with preparing for the IND application, doing some tox studies with the CRO. So a lot of learning was happening in the background as well. And the reason why I'm sharing these details is because all this experiences, along with the realization that there's a niche business market for therapies for brain tumors, led us to discuss how we can commercialize what we are doing in the lab and start a company. So I briefly worked at CCAB, who ended up being our one of the investors who showed interest in commercialization of the IP, which was present in Sheila's lab and Dr. Jason Moffat's lab at Toronto. And we ended up forming a company called Empirica Therapeutics. The company was launched in 2018. Sheila became the CEO of the company. Dr. Jason Moffat, who's an expert in gene editing platforms based in UFT, he became the CSO. And I ended up becoming the director of preclinical development. But as it happens in all the startups, I was the BD guy, I was the HR guy, I was the operations guy, and we were trying to acquire spaces, and we would even go and clean the place to set up the tent there. I mean, we were doing everything, and I learned a lot in the 18 months of the existence of Empirica. We had a great team, great support, great advisors. There was a strong science that supported the company, and we generated a lot of data supporting the idea of targeting this treatment-resistant brain tumor population, and published the data in Cell Stem Cell Journal in 2020, which ended up giving a lot of publicity to Empirica. And by then, we had already raised some seed funds. We were signing contracts with various CMOs to manufacture our therapy. We have a meeting with Health Canada to see how we can start the clinical trials. As we were trying to raise Series A funds, we were approached by this US-based company called Century Therapeutics. So Century specializes in developing cell therapies from induced pluripotent cells that have been genetically engineered to avoid immune rejection. It's a relatively young company in the field of iPSC, heavily backed by Bayer, Fujifilm, and BMS. And they have a stellar team of leaders who have experience with big pharmas. So why we thought it would make sense to work with them. We at Empirica were using autologous patient-derived CAR T cells that have shown modest benefits in the clinic, but once terminally differentiated, these cells are difficult to expand and manipulate. And the same issue is there with allogenic healthy donor-derived cells. With the iPSC platform, we get an ability to do extensive engineering, have more efficient manufacturing of our drug products, and that could be a paradigm shift on how drugs are made in the future. So Century Therapeutics approached Empirica, and they were like, we want to collaborate with you guys because you have a brain tumor expertise. However, when they started doing the due diligence, they realized that this particular setup could be actually faster and more efficient if they could just acquire the whole setup. So unlike usual acquisitions, they promised to keep this whole brain tumor camp here in Canada And instead of doing CAR Ts, they supported us with the iPSC-derived immune cells to make the therapy. And that's exactly what happened. Century acquired Empirica in 2020. Sheila and Jason exited. They now are consultants. And I work at the site here in Hamilton, McMaster Innovation Park. I lead a talented team of scientists at here who are designing, optimizing, and validating this next generation off-the-shelf therapy for brain tumor patients. With that, I'll stop. Might have crossed the line.
Sure, no problem, Parvez. This is very interesting and exciting, and it's amazing listening to all three of you, Kath, Jonathan, and you, Parvez, about how you got to where we are from all sorts of different geographic locations and different origins and cultures, and how you ended up in Canada or ended up here in this world of cell therapy and cancer research. It's amazing. So I think let's move on to sort of the open Q&A and open discussion section, which is going to be moderated by Andrew Giacomelli. He's at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center, and he works in the tumor immunology immunotherapy program with Pam Ohashi, who's again great colleague and fantastic scientist. He did his bachelor's and master's at McMaster, actually, and Jonathan Yerkamp with John Hassel, who I've met a couple of times, great scientist as well. And then he went down to the Dana-Farber and did his PhD at Dana-Farber and the Broad Institute. So welcome, Andrew, and I'll give it over to you.
Thank you for that introduction. And I'd like to thank each of our panelists for sharing your career journeys with us. I think that's really helpful and informative for those of us who are thinking about the next steps in our own career journeys. So it's my pleasure to represent the OICR Rising Stars Network here today for the discussion section. And for this section, I'd like to focus on a few key themes. The first of which deals with the somewhat uncomfortable topics of competition and conflict. The second will deal with career planning and career shaping events. The third with leadership style, and the fourth with mentoring. So at this time, I'd like to encourage anyone in the audience to ask a question related to these themes or anything else they want to know. So if you'd like me to ask the question for you, please type it in the Q&A. But if you'd like to ask it yourself, which we strongly encourage, you can click on the raise hand action icon and we'll give you permission to unmute your mic and turn on your camera if you choose something else. We would also love
I wanted to mention that. Please try to turn on your cameras. We'd love to see you. Don't be shy, especially when you're asking a question. Thanks.
Great. Okay. So I think while people are sort of formulating their questions, I'm going to kick it off with the question.
Sorry, Andrew, Jonathan has his hand up. I just recognize that folks in the audience,
Great.
They may not be visible to you.
Okay, great. Yes, so please give Jonathan the opportunity to unmute his mic.
Yep, go ahead, Jonathan.
I can't hear you, Jonathan.
Maybe it was by mistake.
Earpods give grief with Zoom for reasons I could not explain to you.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for Jonathan to come back online, I'll jump back to my question. So, when you're working in an exciting field, such as the field of cell therapy, that often brings a lot of competition. So are there any strategies that you might suggest that can help mitigate against the threat of another lab scooping your science or another company developing a similar or competing technology? So perhaps I'll start with Pervez here from the industry side.
So yes, there is a lot of competition in cell therapy field, but there's also a lot of room for improvement, especially if we talk about iPSC-derived cell therapy that we are working in. We are in our infancy stage where antibodies were in 1980s. That's where we are. So there's a lot of room of improvement. there's that aspect of looking into going in more challenging tumors, especially oncology is it's definitely crowded in the liquid cancer side, but solid cancer is still something that has not been explored as much, and that is where we are going towards. I think that's where there's an unmet need that we're going after. Of course, you want to collaborate. One of the things we are realizing with so much volatility in the economy and how the stock market is going crazy, I think one person or one team cannot do the job. So collaboration is the way to go, especially if you want to avoid competition and do a meaningful contribution to the patient lives.
Great, thank you for that. And perhaps we'll move it to Jonathan. So from the perspective of an academic, have you run into any issues with competition from other labs working on similar science, and how have you managed that?
You choke it down, and you learn to build a pretty thick skin. But really, you should leave hubris at the door if you're going to be a scientist, because as I tell my lab all the time, there are no new ideas under the sun. And if you've thought of it, someone else has. So not the end of the world. How many papers do we see that come out in the period of a span of 2 to 3 years that tell the same story? You don't have to be first anymore. Those days are gone. I mean, who wouldn't want to be first? Sure. Maybe your paper drops back an impact factor or so, but big deal. Your stuff will get out. If you get overly competitive in science, it's a very unpleasant experience, because you're going to be disappointed every single time. So, it's really about adjusting your expectations, do the best you can, build the best teams, do all the things Parvez said, and accept the fact that sometimes you'll be first and sometimes you won't, but it's okay. You can still get yourself published and you still have a career.
Great. And to Kath, for any final comments on this question?
No, I agree with both of that. That collaboration is key. Other people will have the same ideas as you. That's absolutely sure. And, sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. And I don't think it's losing to be second or third. It means that, everyone's got good ideas, and it speaks to reproducibility of the data, which I also think is good. And I think it is dangerous to have this sort of mentality that you have to be first. And we've seen a lot of misbehavior in science and even in our cell therapy field recently. And I think it's because of this mentality, which I think is not good. So I feel we should actually be more focusing on working together, reproducing what we can do, and coming together as a field so that it's we don't repeat the mistakes of other disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you all for those responses. Okay, so we have a few hands up. Perhaps we'll turn it back to Jonathan, if you would like to ask your question now.
Yeah, sorry about those audio problems before. Great presentations from all the speakers today. I just wanted to ask the classic question, you guys probably get this a lot. Is a PhD necessary to transition into industry? And if not, then does it hold you back in certain respects? Given the fact that myself, I do bioinformatics, which I'm told is a bit less necessary to get a PhD. So what are your thoughts there?
Maybe I can start because, we have been, and it's more on the GMP side, but it can be applicable. We had a lot of hemorrhage to industry over the pandemic. It wasn't helped by the fact that AstraZeneca set up shop just down the road from us. And so what we developed, because there was this mentality in our group that you had to have a PhD and you had to do this. And so we actually have created a career ladder for our people that are focused on GMP regulatory, that includes statistics, etc. And I think bottom line is, and with what we do, experience is really key. And if you can see a path to progression, I think that makes you definitely attractive to in academia and in industry. So personally, I don't think you always need a PhD depending on, you know, the area that you're in, and your area in bioinformatics is an area of serious unmet need. So I would argue that you probably don't, if you have the experience and the track record, that'll count for a lot.
I may want to echo Catherine's thought here. I think it all depends on the area that you're in. And in Century, for example, we have people at the director level, an executive director, as well as a few principal scientists who do not have a PhD. I think experience is a key thing, especially in the field which is naive, like it's an early stage. I think what you know about, it's a problem solving game, like a PhD. Somebody told me this when I was doing an interview at one of the big pharmas, that it's not the science you learn during a PhD is important. It's basically how your ability to do problem solving with your PhD. If you have the experience of problem solving the issues that are faced in science or in diseases, I think that is what people look for, including companies like ours.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, anything to add?
Oh, no, it's all been said.
Great. All right, so let's hand it over to Atom.
Hi, I actually have two questions for Jonathan. You mentioned that you transitioned into industry after the PhD, and then you got out of the industry. And then you say if we have questions about that, we could talk about it. So let's talk about that. And then my other question is regarding that. After you feel like you're not comfortable with the industry, and then you transition back to academia, is that very difficult? Like how do you feel? Compared to transition from PhD to industry, does transition from industry back to academia is even harder or less? Thank you.
Sure. I grew up in academia. It's often easier to go home. I found the transition to industry a bit more complicated. Contrary to popular belief, industry does a better job of recording data and reproducing data than academia ever will. And so getting used to that level of rigor in terms of documentation was a hard thing for a scientist who just wants to generate more data. The reason industry wasn't for me, and again, so many companies are different. I can only comment on the company I was with. They had an idea, they raised a lot of money, the idea was flawed, and so then they were stuck trying to find a purpose for their technology. And that's a reality of industry, is you raise money on a technology and you have to use it. And I often equate that to the square peg syndrome, where if all you have is a square peg, you stuff it into every hole you can find. Whereas as a scientist, you look at the size of the hole and you build an appropriate plug if that's what you need. So that's why industry wasn't really for me. There's a flexibility aspect that was missing. There was also a maturation process that I went through while I was in industry, because prior to being in the company, I had such little faith and confidence in my ability to either raise funds or convince people that my ideas were good. And when I saw how the folks in industry were raising money, I realized I could probably do the same. And it wasn't that I thought their ideas were brilliant. I thought that my ideas were equally bad. So I figured if they could do it, so could I. So that was really, I suppose, a turning point event for me, where I gained faith in my own thought process. Returning to academia was not a challenge. Again, goes back to Kath's point about mentors. I had great mentors at McMaster. They brought me back, so they mentored me, and they provided me the guidance I needed. And I would say that no matter what environment you go to, whether it's industrial, academic, or otherwise, having folks who are there to show you the ropes and to help you be successful is critical. And the other thing that's critical is listening to them. That's also very critical, because far too often, it gets back to my comments about hubris. Many young people don't listen, right?
Great, thank you. Would either of our other panelists like to comment?
Jonathan, only just to say you're still young too. Sorry.
Great.
54 years of
Don't make
age.
me feel old.
All right, so we do have another hand up, and this is from a friend of mine, Dong Hoon, in the audience. So go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi. So I'm a PhD student at U of T, also working on TCR and CAR related stuff. And I have a question for Parvez. So I was wondering, like, as an early PhD student, is there like any opportunities or chances that we can maybe get to get some industry exposure early in our PhD career? And yeah, that's sort of the main question. And what jobs can we really get while doing PhD, and how much experience is enough to get a job? Yeah, sorry, the question is sort of vague.
No, that's fine. That's perfect. I think Canada is in a very unique positions, and I feel personally there are a bunch of opportunities which are out there which the industry folks actually haven't really tapped into. There are places which are funding a lot of this industrial postdoc positions like MITEX and BioCanrex and even OICR. I think that we as a group of scientists in Canada haven't really been circulating much about this opportunities. So that definitely my suggestion would be to look into those open positions or opportunities which you can avail. You also, I feel, may want to kind of look into whether industry is something that you want to go in. Sometimes, and to be very honest, I think, and I don't want to exclude myself, scientists are bad in managing, right? There's management component in many scientists which are missing, and they always feel that they know how to do things, but organizing and managing is something not everybody is good at. When I did this short mini MBA, I had a bunch of other folks with me doing it. And some of those people actually got ticked off. They're like, okay, I can never, ever do this, finance aspect or budget aspect. Yeah, I can do science. I can run Western blots. There are people I know who do not even want to go up the ladder because they don't want to take more responsibilities managing projects. Like I'm happy doing animal studies. I want to do the work and be myself in the research environment. So some of this things also boils down to having a self-realization of what is it exactly what you want to do in your career by exploring those different things and scholarships and fellowships which are out there. I think you may want to kind of check it out and see if you can get some of those. Again, it will all be dependent on your PI, the supervisor who you're working with. I think that also is a critical component. And one of the reasons why I kind of moved and came from neuroscience background to a neuro-oncology background was because there was a possibility of doing more translational research there. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that was a very comprehensive answer. Thank you. And just one little question. I was actually looking through U of T's job board like yesterday, and I saw Century Therapeutics is actually hiring co-ops like for these students to do these cellular immune assays. And I was just wondering, do you guys also maybe hire PhD students?
Yeah, I think different positions are out there based on what requirements are currently there for the company. We here in Hamilton are a smaller group. The company itself is huge. We have more than 200 people now in the company, but in Hamilton it's a smaller group. But we're not the only one. Remember, there are a bunch of companies, especially cell therapy. I think Hamilton is becoming more of a hub for many of the cell therapy companies with Century, Triumvira. setting the camp here, and a bunch of others also based in Hamilton. So I would encourage you to look more broader, and again, like your PhD is basically your training degree, right? You don't have to stick to a specific field itself. If you're good in doing one of the different therapeutic modality testing, I think you will be good at the others. So there is always applicability to it. So look much more broader. And I'm sure things are kind of changing in the biotech market or biotech environment in Canada in the coming years.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Great, thank you. Before we move on to more questions, I was wondering whether the PIs have any perspectives on their graduate students moonlighting as technicians for biotech companies. Is this something that you encourage, or would you, sort of request that your students focus on their thesis project?
No one's ever asked me, actually. None of my grad students have ever asked me. And I personally would advocate that they focus on getting their papers written and their thesis done. I don't know what Jonathan thinks.
Well, we provide a stipend in Canada to graduate students. I can't speak for the US because I don't know how it works, but and the reason we stipend graduate students is because they don't have part-time jobs, regardless of where that part-time job is located. And to give you some perspective, back in the 80s, there were no stipends for graduate students, and graduate students had to have part-time jobs. It was very difficult to get through. So that's why the stipends are there. I don't recommend that a graduate student takes on a part-time gig while they're doing the grad studies. Instead, stay in the lab and get out faster. I mean, there's no need to stay longer. But, if you're inspired, Parvez opened with some very good comments, which are, we have a whole collection of what are called UI opportunities, university industry opportunities. MyTax is the best example, but, Parvez has a whole bunch of other ones. So there is an opportunity to get involved in projects that have an industrial partner, so you can see the inside. And the other good thing about that is it lets them see you. And I believe earlier today, that was a different conversation with Nick Timmons, where basically that was a point he raised as well, that a lot of companies like to get involved in these MyTax type awards because they like to see the farm team. They want to know who's out there where the talent is, and that's a great opportunity. So I don't know that I necessarily ask Parvez for a job today, but you might want to follow them afterwards to look for a partnership opportunity to maybe do a collaborative study with Century so they have a chance to learn about you and you learn about them. But anyways.
Great, thank you. I sort of suspected that would be the perspective from the PIs. Okay, so let's move on. We have a question from one of my lab mates, Ksenia. So please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, everyone. Very interesting to hear all the perspectives. I guess I wanted to sort of further conversation and ask whether it's possible to pursue successful career in research and development in industry when skipping postdoctoral degree and going sort of transitioning to industry straight after PhD. Would you have any perspective on that?
I can take that.
Yeah.
So I tried. Being in Canada is very different than being in the US. I do feel that sometimes after you finish your training, I think you want to still kind of explore what is that you actually write. I think postdoc is a perfect opportunity to learn where you want to take your career in, right? You can change the field that you did your PhD. It could be different from what you're doing in the postdoc. So it is definitely a good step to choose what kind of direction you want to go in doing a postdoc. I think in Canada it's quite difficult, at least for me. When I finished my PhD in University of Manitoba, it was a hard time then to kind of even get an interview in a biotech industry, biotech company. I chose postdoc because I wanted to learn more about what are the other fields that I can go in, which might have a better career prospect than what I was working in. maybe US has a different philosophy there. Again, there's more broader issue about visas and immigration and stuff like that that you may want to consider if you're thinking of moving outside. But I would say, no, it's not a requirement to do a postdoc to get in the industry. But you're now competing with people with 3 years of postdoc experience and 5 years of postdoc experience. And there's definitely, you don't have that advantage if you're competing for a position in the industry without a postdoc.
I see. Thank you very much.
Great. And so, Kath, can you comment on, sort of what fraction of your PhD students who have graduated have moved on directly to industry versus those that have gone on to do a postdoc?
I would say 50%. Industry's heavily recruiting, especially on the East Coast of America at the moment, heavily. And so anyone who's been in a sort of a group that does sort of translational research gets training in GMP and other regulatory aspects is getting really headhunted very quickly. So, and that is a conversation I actually have with the grad students early, where do they see themselves in 5 years, 10 years? Do they see themselves in industry versus, a PI in academia running a lab? Because you actually, the mentorship plan is slightly different as well. And so, yeah, it is an important discussion to have. But equally, I have those discussions with non-PhD scientists in my group who, want to talk about, their career path and where they want to go be in the next 5-10 years. So it is just, everything's about mentorship, honestly. I think Jonathan and I have both said that multiple times. So really, having a team or someone at that mentorship level that can help advise you early and at every stage in your career is so valuable.
Great, wonderful. I think we can all agree that a great mentor makes a great experience. So I'm glad that you take up that mantle. Jonathan, anything else to add to that? Oh, I think you're muted if you're talking. Yeah.
Just trying to find the silly button that always seems to move. The majority of my students go on to some form of industry, either as medical science liaisons or actually working in companies. And I suspect it's probably because of the way I behave and spend a lot of time interacting with companies and thinking about selling off tech, so that I probably don't inspire a lot of academics. One of the students on this call might feel differently, and she's probably one of the few that actually wants to be an academic, but most end up going different ways. Nowadays, academia is not the common route. In fact, I don't know if it ever was, but at least at some point we deluded ourselves into believing that academics was the common route, and it's not. People go off other places. Again, as a PhD scientist, it's going to come down to timing because, as Parvez said, you're going to be in competition with folks who are already in industry. But you just never know. You never know who's looking for someone on the day your application's ready. So don't be shy to do it. Just don't hold high hopes that it's going to work out.
Great, thank you. All right, we do have another question from the audience. Zaid, if you would like to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm actually an undergraduate student, and I'm looking towards pursuing graduate studies, especially in immunology and cancer research, where my current project involves looking at immune responses to infectious diseases. And as Dr. Bollard talked about, bench to bedside, I'm also a medical lab tech, so that's something that I'm kind of deeply interested into. So I was just wondering if you had any insights or any advice for someone pursuing graduate studies, and what would you have wanted to do differently when you pursued it? Thank you so much.
Great. Let's start with Kath, maybe.
So I go back to Jonathan's point that life happens when you're making other plans. So, you know, you can plan, but then stuff will happen that will dictate where you end up. But I think, you know, you're obviously very specific in what you want to do. And so I would definitely, you know, I would still think about where do you see yourself eventually. So I think looking for programs or labs that have your area of interest is great, but then you sort of have to think also, well, do I want to keep my options open? Do I want to keep my options open to take an academic or a industry path, or do I really want to just use this as a trajectory to get to industry? So I think you need to think about that too as you talk to different PIs or programs, because you know, different places will cater to your needs, so to speak. I'm not sure if I'm, you know, making this sort of very clear, but yeah, it's more about making sure that you sort of know what you want to get out of the experience at the place that you end up. But having said that, if you're interested in looking for a job at my place, with your areas of interest, it might be useful.
I'll definitely look into it. Thank you so much.
We're hiring.
Okay, perfect. That's what I wanted to hear.
Great. Jonathan, what do you wish you had known, or do you have any advice for things that you would have done or that you, yeah.
I wouldn't have done anything differently. I probably would have, I don't know that I do everything exactly the same, because I rarely do the same thing twice. It's just part of who I am, but I don't think I would have changed much. You know, you change one thing and there's all the unintended consequences that emerge from that you didn't think would happen. So I stick to my guns. You know, let your life unfold before you and stay open. I often tell my students to stand at the wall next to a door, right? If you stand right up next to that wall, all you see is the wall. If you take one step to the right or the left, you see the door. So if you're too preoccupied with only limited vision, you won't see the opportunities available to you. So just keep your minds open, be experiential, and see what happens.
Great. Pervez, any final comments on that question?
No, I completely agree. I think if you want to definitely do some career planning, but end of the day, I think you need to have that ability to pivot based on how circumstances arise and how things change in your personal life as well. I think that's something we always discount when we talk about passion and interest of what you want to do. But end of the day, I think there is multiple other things that will factor in. Opportunity is the biggest influencer when you make your career choices. Like there will be times where there will be an opportunity coming out of blue, and you just have to be prepared for it. I think preparing yourself is the best you could do. Definitely explore different opportunities. Don't shy away thinking, oh, this is something which I'll never like, and before you actually explore it. So I love the fact that you talk about co-ops. I think co-ops are something, it's something that I think we should have more and more co-ops in the system. So it's a two-way street. I think even the industry gets benefited by these co-ops. We in the past have given jobs to the co-ops who have worked during their graduate studies in our industry. So it kind of helps us know them better, but you also get to know whether that's something that you want to do or you want to pursue in your career as well. So explore. I think exploring is a key thing that you need to remember.
Great. So it looks like we've cleared the floor of questions. So perhaps now I'll send it back to Laszlo for some final remarks. But before I do that, I'd just like to thank each of our panelists again for a wonderful discussion. And thank you to all of our question askers who've been so responsive and participatory today.
Wow, yeah, this was a tour de force. Andrew, fantastic facilitation, loved it. Parvez, Jonathan, Kath, I mean, I learned a lot here just listening to you and reinforcing some of the concepts that I have promulgated to my students and postdocs and other people I've interacted with over the years, I think you really consolidated so many amazing concepts and issues here. Life, society, not, keeping yourself open to change and being courageous, and seeing the opportunities as they arise. And I really feel that that's basically the essence of it, is that we're all scientists. We entered our science because we wanted to discover, and so we also have to take that thirst, that enthusiasm, that drive to discover into the way we formulate and conceptualize our career if we want to discover. And that means we need to, just like we give ourselves open, or we have ourselves open to seeing new data, new results. We have to keep ourselves open to seeing new career opportunities as they arise, and not being afraid of change. And I think that that's also epitomizes kind of my career too as well, going from academia back to industry, back to academia, back to industry, and now sort of back to semi-academia, like vacillated back and forth. And so, yeah, I don't think going to industry right now is a showstopper if you want to go back to academia. In fact, I think right now the academic world has changed. And in fact, that we're, Jonathan alluded to in terms of data and fastidiousness of our data collection and documentation. I think more and more academic groups and universities, et cetera, and the world of academia really values that experience and that mentality of bringing back that fastidiousness, in which you need to actually generate reproducible data, by the way, so I really think that you have to follow your heart, and I also think that you need to get out there and talk to people. No matter how much I like Zoom and these social platforms, and I think the pandemic has taught us many things. The pandemic has, led us into some good things, like using these social media platforms, opening up more meetings to more people because they don't have to travel. But at the same time, I think it's allowed us to meet each other and go and meet new people, and have those spontaneous ad hoc interactions and encounters. And I really hope, and this is my sincere hope, that as this pandemic ends, that we go back to really that human interactions that our human species was designed to do, because really that's where you meet people and then have these new ideas, and that's when new opportunities arise, by having that casual discussion with someone, either a peer or a person you meet at a conference or somewhere, and who says, oh, by the way, have you thought of this? I have a position open here. Or have you thought of talking to this guy? And I think that's the way it happens, no matter how prescripted and, there's no recipe. A lot of, my mentees say, well, what's the recipe? There's no recipe. You really have to be courageous and go for it, be passionate, but not be afraid to change. Go get out there. I encourage and get out there and present your data. I think that that's important. Get out there, present your data, show it to the world, let it be criticized. And then that's the way you meet people. And that's the way people then realize, wow, this data is amazing. Your research is important and connects with what I'm doing. Are you interested in coming here? Or a company would say, oh, wow, that research is really important for my product. Oh, are you interested? So I think this is where we have to embrace really the people aspect of it all. And this is who we are. We're all people, and ultimately it's all about people. And so I really like to thank Kath for really spending her precious time and her words of wisdom, and Jonathan, forever, always, I'm always amazed at your insight and and your views, and Parvez, it was great to meet you. I think very, very insightful and great facilitation, Andrew. So with that, I'd like to close the session. And like I said, I always tell people, please feel free to reach out to your senior people and scientists, in your institutions that you know. And many of them, even if you cold call them and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm interested in this, or can you give me advice on that? 99% of the time, they'll love to give advice to you, and don't be afraid to reach out. And this is this mentorship. So So I'd like to close the session and thank everyone for joining and sticking it in there with us. And our next Rising Stars Fireside Chat event will be in the fall of 2022. Again, right after our next Horizons and Challenges in Oncology series. And we'll come back with a very exciting topic. We'll sit down and with Dozy and our Johnson & Johnson colleagues and figure out another exciting topic and bring another exciting set of really amazing scientists for you to talk to. Okay, so with that said, thank you and good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lezo. Bye.